This morning, Jim Ellis indicated that business executives are widely considered the poster children of unethical behavior. Now, I personally question that widely held assumption, but what is very, very clear is that business leaders face very, extremely difficult, thorny ethical challenges. And one of the roles of business schools, business education, is to provide our students with some tools that will help them when they go out into their careers and they attempt to put into practice what they have learned in business schools. Now, universities, and some of us have sounded a little bit this way this morning, is that we're kind of scolds and that we know it all and that we're going to teach people how to be ethical and that we ourselves are almost above criticism and that we're doing our own jobs. And the truth is we're not. And even at USC, we fell short in our business school for a very, very long time in terms of meeting our responsibility with regard to ethics. In 1990, we had 5 MBA classes related to ethics, social responsibility, the role of business in society. 4 years later, we had none. They were all taken out as a result of decisions that were made by the faculty of the business school. It was not until 4 years ago when Jerry Neely came around and he made his generous gift that the ethics again started to find its way back into the curriculum. And so one thing I want to say is mea culpa from us, and the second thing is many, many thanks to you, Jerry, for helping us to correct that shortcoming on our part. So thanks, Jerry. Jesse Unruh was quoted this morning, and one of the things that was not mentioned about Jesse Unruh was that Jesse Unruh was a USC grad. He was one of us. And his famous comment about money being the money's milk of politics is absolutely true, but it's also true with regard to academia. And Jerry, thank you very much for providing us with the mother's milk of scholarship. Yeah. All right. We have an incredible panel here today. They're all stars, and I could spend all day offering the superlatives about their tremendous accomplishments, but you do have them in their bios. And I think you really ought to take a look at these because we could not have put together a better panel, and Ali, thanks for having done that. The first person that we're going to call on is a person who I've only met today, Marianne Jennings, who is a professor of legal and ethical studies at Arizona State. But I've known her, it seems, for a very, very long time, because her book, The 7 Signals of Ethical Collapse, is really in many ways the Bible of applied business ethics. And every single business teacher, in the world knows that book. And so she's really the expert in this. And today she's going to talk about some of those signals as a result of how it affects ethical culture. So, Marianne, please.
Let me explain this chart. It's a sample dashboard. And if you look down there, this is what they call the classical infrastructure of a company. So you have a code of ethics, ethics training, and the numbers that I have there, 97% in the first column, 81%, depending on which study you look at, reflect the number of companies overall that would have those components of ethical infrastructure, which was something we created after 2001 and Enron and all of those collapses and added to in 2008. And we said, with metrics, have these and you will have an ethical company. So what's the green column on the second one that has 195%, 100%? That's my data from the companies I have worked with that have been in the headlines for ethical issues. And so what you realize is those companies that had much higher than the average percentage of ethical infrastructure were the ones that got into trouble. And here's just a few examples. Kindred Healthcare, one of Fortune 100 companies, best companies for years running, magnificent compliance program, but yet they committed fraud, sending people to nursing homes when they didn't need to go there. These are not difficult ethical questions. Wells Fargo, making up 3.5 million fake accounts is not a difficult ethical question, but Wells Fargo was one we studied for its compliance program. They had to fire 5,300 employees as a result of that. And the Federal Reserve is demanding that in addition to the 4 board members they got rid of, they have to get rid of 4 more because they want change in the company. BP, one of your scholars pointed out today, was rated very high on safety and environmentalism. The problem with them was their safety was things like lids on coffee cups and holding the stairwell. It did not focus on the process safety, and they were using a single thread design in those offshore projects. No other oil company in the world was using it. It was cheaper and it was faster, but it was also more dangerous. That is an interesting ethical question. And of course, Penn State graduated more scholar athletes than any other university, appeared to be on the face a magnificently compliant organization, but they had a coach who was molesting young boys on the campus. These are not close calls. And what occurs to me as I listened this morning and continue to listen this afternoon is we keep talking about technology and all of these issues, and yet what we failed to realize is much of this comes down to the human element, so that you can come up with the algorithms, and one of your scholars dealt with this issue. You can come up with the algorithms, the mechanisms, but you are still dealing with humans. And as technology skyrockets, as the slide showed this morning, it seems like human behavior is going the other way. As I'm trying to drive home, these are not difficult ethical questions. From the past year, I would say one simple rule might be just keep your clothes on at work. That would be helpful, particularly in the halls of Congress and in the words of Georgia Searchlight, that song, keep your hands to yourself. You know, those are 2 simple rules, and yet we seem to struggle tremendously. So what should we be looking at if we're trying to predict what kinds of things will result in ethical issues in business? What should we be looking at? Well, here's one to consider, and maybe somebody can come up with an algorithm of the 4 that I'll do. I don't have time to do all of them. But nobody wakes up one day and says, you know, fraud, this is the way I'm going to make money in business. It starts out because they have problems, and there are always underlying business problems. So a couple of examples. Waste management is one of the very earliest fraud cases in accounting. They were the only people dealing with picking up garbage and recycling. I grew up in an era when we used to burn trash in the backyard, so I'm very old, but I remember that. And waste management was the first mover. But as competition came in, they couldn't do it. And so they began, slowly but surely, accounting metrics changes, for example, depreciation on the waste bins that they had. They just kept changing the formula. It was so bad that the external auditors were writing memos and saying, you got to change this by next year. And they didn't, and they continued to sign off. Krispy Kreme. This is sad because you don't usually see this kind of behavior in a donut company, really. It's very sad when this happens. It was just plain old simple overexpansion. And these numbers that they were giving to us, waste management, Krispy Kreme, they did so well for so long that it's almost as if I can't step off the pedestal, and it starts. So my first suspicion is always, if they're doing well, we should question. We should ask the questions. Tesla, this is one I wrote about 3 years ago and say, you can't spend this kind of money and have your friends and cousins on the board and be funding their companies and not have trouble at the company. And the paper yesterday illustrated that the cash burn is a problem. Uber wrote about this one. This one was going down no matter what. You had a young'un in charge and no supervision, and that was the end result. And Sunbeam. The products were dated. Chainsaw Al came in and just destroyed the company. A little accounting fraud along the way. Here's another example. Bluebell Creamery, not Blue Bunny, Bluebell Ice Cream, victim of their own success, doing so well, and just everybody wanted the ice cream. They couldn't keep up with production. Rather than slowing down and building the facilities, and maybe not meeting the demand presently, but keeping people on the line, they just ran the facilities 24/7. You can't do that with ice cream. You need deep clean. And the end result was all of these warnings from 2012 all the way through to 2016, when they eventually, because of listeria, had to shut down the company for 4 months. And the whole time, I pulled these up from public record. Inspectors were telling them, get the crickets out of the facility. You know, I know they're weird ice cream flavors, but I'm not sure that we've incorporated those in there. Rust on the doors, they were not fixing the problem. And the whole time, the employees were saying, it's just run, run, run. And they couldn't get their message through. So that when we're looking at what causes these kinds of things, it's almost the success. And we should be watching very carefully to see some of the characteristics of those companies. Then incentives and bonuses. It was interesting as I listened to the medical discussion today, because it's, oh, the terrible ethical dilemmas doctors face. It doesn't matter what oath they take. If you put them in an incentive program, they will go south on you. Just an interesting example here is the VA program. The goal was, the noble goal, get the queue lines down for how long it takes to get patients in there and how long it takes for them to get tests. Everybody was measured by this. Those at the top got bonuses. Those who were in the rank and file were measured on their performance reviews by this. And the end result was they met the numbers beautifully. They all got their rewards. They all got their bonuses. The problem is it was made up. You'll get what you incentivize. It just might not be real. I laughed when the dean this morning said, what do I do with the Fitbit data? Well, I would say question it, because people who are competitive will put the Fitbit on the hamster and the wheel and chalk it up that way. Or a table saw works very well. It does get your Fitbit numbers up. Be careful what you incentivize. They'll get there. What they did was develop 2 sets of books. One for the patients they could get in there and treat very easily. The second for the patients who were really quite ill. And Phoenix, where I live, was the epicenter, and the end result was the sickest patients were lost in the system. Nobody called them back. They didn't get their treatment. They died awaiting treatment. So the VA said, we'll fix this. Now we'll make quality. Readmission will be the criteria. We want your readmission rates down. Well, what happened is they didn't want to readmit patients, and you would have patients under observation for 9 days, one of whom died in observation. So that those are the kinds of things you have to look at, the incentives. How successful are they? The pressure they feel, the incentives. This is public sector, the Atlanta public school system. 9 years in a row, test scores go straight up. Be careful what you incentivize, because if you look at this, what they really wanted was educated young people. What they measured were the test scores. They got the test scores, but the young people had no education at all. And the behavior was bizarre. They were walking around during the test saying to the kids, oh, you might want to change that answer. That's not right. That's how we started one of the investigations. Child went home and told her mother, I'd rather do the test myself. And that's how they started an investigation. It got so bad on the weekends they were going home and to the home of a principal or a teacher, putting gloves on and changing the answers on the test sheets. These are not difficult ethical questions, but yet the business programs incentivize those. This has to be revisited and remeasured so that what you are measuring is the behaviors. If you want safety, you don't measure the lagging indicator of how many lost work days. You measure what's causing the accidents. Paul ONeill at Alcoa years ago, when he took over as CEO, said, why are so many people getting hurt at work if they're meeting their incentive plans for safety? And so he said the new safety metric is every time there's an accident, from paper clip to a lost limb, I want a report, I want to know what happened, I want to know how the employee is, and I want to know your system for fixing it. In this era of technology, he was doing this when they had to meet by phone once a week to go over the results. We should be able to instantly get those things out in the field. Using technology to control the human side is really important. Here's another one. I look at motivational monitors. If you want to get around the systems and everything else, just get to the people. And so these are the things that companies, organizations say, look at the excuses, do whatever it takes. Go the extra mile. Washington Mutual was the power of yes, and of course they were one of the first financial institutions to collapse. Turns out they should have said no, on a few of those loans. I want to show you what will happen. Southwest Airlines mantra is on time every time. Well, it was. They're not anymore. This was when they were on time every time. And everybody got a bonus if they met their on time, and that's a hard thing to control in air travel. And so what happened is the pilots said, we've got to build in some cushion for when things go wrong. The cushion is the jet bridge. They close it 10 minutes before. And if everybody's on the plane and you've got the passenger list, you can take off early, get in the queue, you've built in some cushion. Well, the pilots said, the problem is us. It's difficult to get us to sit down. We're slow. I travel a great deal. Cell phones, they're talking on stuffing the overheads, chatting in the aisle. Can't sit down. The pilots said, let's just rock the plane back and forth really quickly a few times while people are boarding. And they did that, and of course people started falling all over the place and said, we're leaving. They sat down, worked like a charm. The drawback was it violated about 8,500 federal regulations in the process. That was the one, that's the human side of these issues. That's just plain wrong. But it's the signals that we send, and I read the mantras that are on the walls in the paperwork of companies, and I worry. Here's the last one, sign number 4. And this is where we really could use some help with those algorithms and other things. I look at Wells Fargo, which is a fascinating one to me. Nobody seemed to pick up on this, despite the fact that the first issue on people making up accounts came to them in 2000. This did not become public until 2016, but in 2000 they had a report that 63 employees had gamed the system to get their quarterly bonus checks for setting up new accounts or new account services. Internal audit raised a few questions. They referred it to the division head, and she was so successful in community banking that nobody challenged her. But a board should have looked at this average. Wells Fargo had 6.2 products per customer. The industry average was 2.7. It should have occurred. Are we really almost 3 times better than every other bank on the face of the earth? Those kinds of things, and just following the compliance line. There was one. Where are the calls coming from? Why are they coming in? It would have been a hit. Extraordinary revenues, HR issues. These are all of the things that I see that are common in all of these companies that have troubles. What we need to do is start looking at factors beyond just the infrastructure, beyond just the compliance, and start saying, okay, where can we step in when there's human weakness and get either appropriate controls, change the metrics, or start examining the company for the issues that we're raising here, so that that human element will always be there. And the problem is we tend to come up with rules and systems and metrics that don't really deal with that human problem. And these are the kinds of things that we should be looking at to help those organizations before they end up on the headlines. Thank you.
I did a study in 1985 of 24 corporations that were widely recognized for their exemplary ethical and social responsibility practices, and 15 years later, only 4 of those firms had maintained those practices. So, very common pattern. Our next speaker is the executive director of what is widely recognized as the finest applied ethics center in the world. And the person who's responsible for it being that way is standing right up there. His name is Kirk Hanson. And among other things, he has set a standard so high for the Neely Center that we've now know what we want to be when we grow up, and we want to be like the Markkula Center. And in a slight conflict of interest, Kirk serves on our advisory board, and he's helping us to get there, which we greatly appreciate.
I feel it's safe. USC never be able to catch up in ethics, but you know.
I've known Kirk since 1973, and during that time, since then, he's consulted with over 100 companies to help them with their ethics program, and he is working extensively and has been now for the last couple of decades in Silicon Valley. And one of the subjects that he's going to talk about today has to do with the technology there. And if there's anybody who's on top of all this, it's Kirk Hanson.
Thank you, Jim. As Marianne put up her 4 fraud cases, and given that all 4 of us have done counseling of corporations on ethics, I cringed, but was very proud that only 2 of the 4 were clients of mine that had the major fraud problems. I took the assignment to talk about next generation ethics. How is the practice of ethics in companies going to be different in the next decade than it has been in the past? And so that's the question I'm trying to answer. If I can get this right, good. What I did was to think back, and one of the advantages of being old is that you've been present at all of these developments from the 1960s on. And so we've been involved, corporations have been involved in developing a system for managing ethics over the decades with different provocative incidents. And so a look back at the history is useful. There is a comparable history about how companies manage ethics, and I'm not going into that today because I'm going to focus on the future. But just be aware that there's been a maturing of the corporate processes and systems for how to manage ethical behavior decade by decade, as we have grown in our sophistication about how to address corporate behavior. However, another way we might look at this panel is, here are the people who've been the ethics consultants. What the hell have they been doing for the last 40 years, and why haven't we solved all of the ethics problems in business?
They call me in after.
They call you in after I was in? Yeah, okay. So what I'd like to talk about is, for the next decade, I think the primary motivating factor for changing how we deal with business ethics is going to be the whole issue of artificial intelligence. And being in Silicon Valley, we constantly are confronted with this in trying to figure out how this is going to change corporate behavior. There are other possible provocations for the next 10 years. I think the question of behavior of CEOs is going to be much more prominent, whether it's the Uber CEO, the Theranos CEO, and so many others. Another one is possibly the consumer pressure that suddenly is motivated and activated by social media, Delta Airlines and the gun industry, all of the advertisers that are forcing Laura Ingraham to be a little more restrained. That's yet to be seen. But there's a question of consumer pressure and corporations being called to take value-oriented stands. There is a resurgence of the debate over the purpose of the corporation, and Larry Fink at BlackRock has been leading that. And finally, there's the question of behavior off the job. And if you read the Morgan Stanley story on the front page of the New York Times a couple of days ago, it's the question of, if an individual, a particular wealth manager they have in Portland, I believe it was, has a number of restraining orders from wives, former girlfriends for abusive behavior, should that influence whether Morgan Stanley retains him as an employee? When it's on the front page of the New York Times, it's gotten a lot more attention within Morgan Stanley now than it has for the last 3 or 4 years with this individual. Okay, so what is it about the question of artificial intelligence that is going to make it the dominant influence over the next 10 years. First of all, every corporation is a high-tech company today, and every corporation is an artificial intelligence organization today and for the next 10 years. Every organization is going to employ data management and artificial intelligence to a much greater extent than in the past. So there are going to be a wealth of ethical issues that have faced only a small subset of companies that are now going to face almost all companies. Questions of data collection and surveillance, data manipulation and profiling, and the use of those profiles in algorithms, data protection, cybersecurity. We had a panel the other day of the 6 largest Silicon Valley firms. How do they handle data breaches? What are their internal procedures? It was very revealing of different strategies taken by different firms. Privacy, it's not just Facebook, it's everybody. And that's going to be predominant when there is so much more data and so much more use of it. Safety, as we've talked about, accuracy and efficacy of algorithms, bias in algorithms, and so on. But it's also the question of machine learning and the fact that machine learning is sometimes a completely opaque process, and we don't know what is actually in the algorithm that is producing the results. So transparency and consumer rights, the difference between regulation in different parts of the world and the General Data Protection Act, which is coming into effect in Europe in May, will create huge discussions around transparency, consumer rights, the right to delete material, and so on. And finally, the employment effects of AI. And every company is going to have to take a stand on the particular tasks that are replaced. If it's the healthcare industry, I heard a discussion amongst a group of healthcare executives. If we remove the need for all radiologists in the United States because a radiology algorithm can read all of these films much more efficiently and accurately, what do we do with all the radiologists? That is going to be repeated in every company's workforce. So where do we go from here? How AI changes the task of business ethics. We talked earlier about the lag between corporate practice or decisions and regulation. That's going to create a huge additional space for ethics and for the setting of norms. The spread between what we've thought about as ethical behavior and regulated or government-required behavior is going to expand, creating much more demand for ethics. Uncertainty about the effects of AI systems will create a demand for risk analysis that hasn't been there in the past to the same extent. Random and unexpected impact on persons, the ability to respond quickly, and the ethics of that capability. The opaqueness, as I talked about, and how to deal with that. Public policy and compliance will lag. Greater alienation of stakeholders that feel they're dealing with a machine and a set of algorithms and not a company. You all probably have had the experience when you call customer service, and you're having a nice conversation with a young man or young woman, and then you realize it's a computer. That will be replicated more and more, creating more alienation. But ironically, the paper and data trail will be superb for going back to those frauds and uncovering much more about what happened. So those things are changing. Here's just a few ideas about what will be different about managing business ethics in this age of AI. New skills are needed to participate in both the design and the discussion and the examination of AI systems. Compliance will be of little help, and you need to base your program on values and ethical commitments of the organization. The evaluation of ethical risk will be much more critical. The need for a new type of ethical training for engineers, design staff, and others who are engaged in the creation of these algorithms and artificial intelligence. And the need to double down on CEO leadership, board oversight, and corporate culture to motivate ethics. We understand that those are the most effective levers, not whether you do annual ethics training or whether you have a corporate mission statement or a code. It really is the leadership, the board oversight, and the culture that has been created. Those are just a few of the directions that I think this is going in, but we will be talking about business ethics very differently in 2 to 3 years than we have to date. Thank you.
And thank you for including me in this very critical conversation. And the area that I'd like to touch upon is the crisis and the inflection point we are around trust right now. I think you're seeing a lot of conversation around trust in institutions, trust in governments, trust in leadership. And I don't know if any of you have heard of the Edelman Barometer, the report on trust, but they do an annual report. And right now, trust levels are at their lowest levels in decades. So trust in leaders, corporations, governments, and so forth. And what we're seeing is that organizations right now are trying to recalibrate their entire process and their compliance programs, their ethics programs, their HR initiatives, their communication initiatives around really rebuilding trust. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time around that. Just by way of background, what I do is I work as a practitioner. I come into corporations typically when an organization is under investigation or coming out from under investigation. They've gotten into a deferred prosecution agreement with the Department of Justice, or if, let's say, a pharma healthcare company, they're coming going into a CIA or even coming out of a CIA and going to their second round. And I'll work with the DOJ monitors or the investigators who want to come in and help not only detect what are the patterns, but what are some of the processes that can be changed. And I think Marianne and Kirk have touched upon this. What should be measured differently? How are we rewarding and incentivizing the executives? And now really we're seeing a lot of scrutiny at the board level. So just kind of by way of, kind of where were we and where are we going? When I joined the industry in 2001, this was, post 9/11, we were coming out of Enron, WorldCom, and, there were a number of corporate scandals, Tyco and so forth, and we were kind of shocked to the system as a society. And what's interesting is the cover of Time magazine at the end of 2010 was The Decade from Hell, and there was really a focus on culture and where are we going, and, it'll probably better, it says why the next one will be better, why the next decade will be better. And what's interesting is as we ended last year, in December of last year, the cover of Time magazine had the silence breakers. And the silence breakers, again, really pointed to the fact that there have been certain complicit patterns of enablement and abuse of power at the highest levels of leadership for decades. Again, I think there was a panelist earlier who said that she was surprised that the Me Too movement not only has sustained itself, but the conversation has continued. But again, sexual harassment is nothing new. Many of us know that harassment in general and discrimination and bullying and a lot of these kind of behaviors that have been in the workforce are nothing terribly new. But what's fascinating is that when you look at a lot of the headlines here, and it's really interesting when you take a look at the Harvey Weinstein case, which was quite explosive. Does anyone know how Harvey Weinstein finally got terminated? Because it was not for the sexual assault. This is what's fascinating. Does anyone know? Harvey Weinstein, Harvey Weinstein, in his renegotiated employment contract in 2015, his board, the Weinstein Company board, had put together something very new called a code of conduct. So earlier when Ted said, the entertainment media industry has benefited from certain freedoms of not being constrained through codes, inside what essentially the board did is they adopted something called a code, and in the code they had various policies and so forth. But in his employment contract, it said that he could only be terminated for if he was convicted of an act of moral turpitude. Convicted is the key word. When you settle allegations repeatedly, and you're seeing many of these faces over here with settlements, you never have the opportunity to complete the investigation and reach a conviction. So it was actually the Code of Business Conduct that the board had stapled, which he didn't accept, but had stapled to his revised 2015 employment agreement that allowed them to take action in terminating him because of misuse of company funds. All right, so now, it's not just sexual harassment. There's a number of other issues that we're seeing across organizations. And I work with organizations that have even continued to expand their global footprint through M&A activity and so forth. So I've gotten familiar with some of the issues or local business issues that happen at a cultural level. So what is a gift and a bribe in a country? Sometimes the breaking bread and having a meal with someone is considered how we engender trust and build trust before conducting business. In other But if you're a U.S. organization, that violates the FCPA, and so there's a number of steps around that. If you take a look at the Wells Fargo case, which my colleagues have shared, or even we've touched upon Equifax and Cambridge Analytica today on the data breach, again, you're seeing that there are no rules that can truly legislate the behavior. So you can continue to revise policy and simplify policy and ensure that organizations in the workforce accept the policy, but how do you actually translate that policy into action? And that is where you're wondering what has occurred today that is different than the last 4 decades. So a shift has essentially happened. And a lot of us are kind of, as I work with boards and corporate executives, they say, well, we've got, I've worked with organizations that have 700 lawyers on staff. And I'm an organization of recovering lawyers and advisors in org dev. And one of the things they say is, well, there's a rule for that. Let's follow the rule. But rules don't necessarily motivate behavior, as we know. There's plenty of evidence through the headlines. So the shift that has happened is with technology and with social media has essentially leveled the playing field and become an equalizer. And by equalizing this playing field and allowing the power of one to have a narrative to connect their stories to the world, no longer do you have to worry about managing ethics per se, right? We can't manage and control the story anymore. You are seeing these hashtag movements completely move virally, grassroots-wise, and you're seeing organizations now step up and say, wait a minute, we've had the policies, we have the leadership. Yes, we may need to go and revise some of how we incentivize and perform and measure behavior, but actually, we need to go in and start having a dialogue in our organizations. And the dialogue is having those uncomfortable conversations about what? Abuse of power, complicity, which was the #1 searched word of 2017 on dictionary.com, complicit. Okay? So when you think of complicity, you think of, okay, complicity, how does it manifest itself? What does it look like? There are business cultures of complicity. You all know where those segments and pockets are. You've probably worked in some organizations or institutions that have had some hallmarks of that. So I work with, in the GRC, in the governance, risk, and compliance space, I work with compliance officers, I work with general counsels, I work with CEOs. And we can sit here and tighten up the processes, making sure the audits are done correctly, making sure, again, my colleagues have touched upon risk mitigation processes. But what is the #1 reason why somebody doesn't speak out? Does anyone know? The #1 reason, you can just call it out. Why doesn't, yes. Very good, fear of retaliation, but there's one above that now. So the research has actually gone above fear of retaliation. Peer pressure? No, not yet. No.
No one will listen.
No one will listen. Very good. Bingo. You get the reward. Yes. So what it actually is why bother? Why bother speaking out? Because there's a lack of equity and procedural justice. There's a lack of the organization. The organization has a pattern of not taking action against the allegations that have been lobbed, and that's why you're seeing with all the headlines that I showed earlier, just a few slides ago, these are organizations that had policies, that had codes, that had in-house counsel. For example, the general counsel of a company, a lot of you may not realize this, has been operating also as the compliance officer, which I think is a great question to debate. Is there an inherent conflict there? Because if the general counsel needs to defend the organization and protect it, it's a very defensive posture, whereas the compliance officer should truly have an independent line into the board and the executive team to be able to report misconduct and escalate it even if the misconduct is coming from the CEO. So look, culture is a key driver. It's come up in everything, whether it's the U.S. federal sentencing guidelines, the Serious Fraud Office, the DOJ. What we're seeing is they are looking for in their investigations, what are the patterns that have been allowed for decades and decades? That's what they're looking for. They're not looking for just the floor, which is going to be your policies, your rules. They're looking at how these policies are infused with values and purpose and engendering trust. So what I typically advise companies is the time for building relationships is not in the middle of crisis. And of course, you never want to let a good crisis go to waste. So what I'll do is I'll spend a lot of time with the executive team and the board talking about really emboldening and developing their middle management. Because when you think about how you measure yourself and how you are rewarding your organization, it's typically your line manager, your supervisor, someone who's setting that tone locally. And when you do business abroad, it's typically that supervisor at that country level who understands the dynamics there. And if you escalate or report misconduct, and we've seen it in many of the cases, Wells Fargo, that was all middle management, BP, all middle management. When you take a look at these cases, there was a culture at the middle that was saying, look, we've got to hit our numbers, we've got to get it done, we're going to work at this speed, and they enabled this to happen. So ensuring that the middle management and frontline management essentially is developed, measured, and or action is taken. Because if your corporations are not taking action, that sends another message as well. And there's some statistics here for you. For example, less than 2% of managers are actually trained around active listing. Or the average manager will interrupt an employee within 17 seconds of someone reporting misconduct. So if you're constantly interrupting, you're not going to say anything. And in terms of, kind of what are we seeing in terms of just kind of the writing and the research around this, I just happen to be looking at the trends around just HBR on this issue. And look at some of the topics and titles. You would never see this. We're not looking at the 48 laws of power anymore. We're looking at how to be an inspiring leader, how to infuse values into how we lead. How do we measure the neuroscience of trust? So to me, that is trending around organizations investing more around developing leaders to be more humble, to demonstrate vulnerability, to promote greater dialogue, so that they can actually engender and build trust. Now, in the organization that I'm with at LRN, we actually do a couple of research reports, and I thought these statistics I just would share with you. We just released a report called The State of Moral Leadership. And in the report, we surveyed about 500 people across the U.S., and what we noticed is that employees that think their organizations would be more successful, for example, if their leadership had moral authority. Think of what a concept that is, to actually have moral authority in your corporation. Again, these are the leading organizations that are shifting in the direction of trying to build more ethical and values-based corporations, are those that are leaning and using kind of not abusing moral license, but developing leaders around moral leadership. So kind of the last thing I'd like to kind of end on is, a few of my colleagues mentioned this, but at the C-suite and at the board level, boards today are finding themselves to be increasingly accountable as individuals about the actions of their organizations. We're seeing it with lawsuits against the shareholder lawsuits against Steve Wynn's board. We're seeing what's happening with Wells Fargo. And you're going to continue to see this. I think Michigan State University's board of directors just retained an outside counsel, outside law firm to protect themselves. So as you're seeing these trends, we are literally seeing before our eyes the evolution of what is the role of a board member in accountability for corporations and corporate behavior. So on that note, what I'd like to end with is to show you an example. I've worked with insurance firms, pharmaceuticals, healthcare, oil and gas, energy. I've worked in so many different industries. And a trend that is cutting across the board is that with the shift to more values-based and mission-based kind of policy, they are trying to align their corporate brands because consumers are pulling away from their brands and associating, like you mentioned, Uber. I've spent a lot of time with Uber. I've spent a lot of time with Google and Apple and several high-tech organizations here. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to reinvest and align their brands around what are we in the business of. So today, I would say the mantra is that we're seeing is the business of business is no longer just being in business. It's not just being in business for profits. The business of business today is being a part of society. And how are we impacting the societies and the countries that we're doing business with? How are we affecting the communities that we're doing business with? So I'm just going to show you this quick clip. This is not a clip that I produced in any way. It's just one organization, and you may have seen this clip. It was presented during the Super Bowl. But I think it's a great example of how organizations are shifting their brand alignment. Here we go.
Breaking news from Washington as lawmakers face
wildfires continue to allegations of misconduct.
Why you look so sad? Tears are in your eyes. Come on and come to me.
How hard is it just take some time out of your day to give them a ride to school and show them that you support them?
Be ashamed to cry. Let me see you through. 'Cause I seen the dark side too. When when the night falls on you, you don't know what to do.
When disaster strikes to one, we all get together and support each other. That's the nature of humanity.
I'll stand by you. I'll stand by you. Won't let nobody hurt you. I'll stand by you. So, if you're not getting mine, don't hold it all inside. Come on and talk to me now. Hey, what you got to hide?
It's a calling to the nation how great we are and how great we can be.
Like you, when you're standing at the crossroads, don't know which path to choose. Let me come along, 'cause even if you're wrong, I'll stand by you. I'll stand by you. Won't let nobody hurt you. I'll stand by you. And even if the dark gets sour, and I'll never desert you, I'll stand by you.
So a focus on finding your corporate soul and your corporate ethos is really the way we're launching into 2018. So thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of this conversation.
Our next speaker is Gary Cook, who is an entrepreneur. He's been a CEO of a couple different companies. He's now, for the last couple of years, has been serving as an executive coach. Gary and I got our first real lessons in ethics while we were serving together in the Nixon administration.
He didn't tell you how it turned out, but we're both still here. But I think it's interesting, by the way, that Jim has spent a lot of his life focused on ethics, and as you will discover, one way or another, I think I've spent a lot of my life dealing with ethical issues as well. And I suspect that going through that experience, although thank God we weren't as close perhaps as either one of us could have been to the White House in the Nixon administration, probably had something to do.
Yeah, but we were both pretty close.
We're probably uncomfortably
yes,
close.
Right, yeah.
So if there was any doubt in anyone's in this room's mind this morning that dealing with ethical issues in organizations is not easy, I'm sure that today already has disabused you of that notion, right? These are challenging, difficult issues. The clip we just saw suggests a way of making them really simple, right? The question probably would be, how can you make 80% or 90% of the organizations in this world act in the way that I think individuals are prone to act when they're acting as individuals? And that's a question that's really interested me ever since the Nixonian days. In the 1990s, at the behest of the U.S. Department of Education, I became known as kind of the Darth Vader of for-profit vocational education schools, because they asked me to go into 3 of the largest chains of those schools and basically liquidate them because they had failed to meet Department of Education cohort default rate rules. And that experience over 4 or 5 years, I saw incredible examples of what Marianne Jennings was talking about, and other people have talked about in various ways in terms of seeing not just weak signals, but very strong signals of incredibly poor ethical behavior, ranging from a board member in one of those institutions who was taking consulting money at the same time he was a board member, right up to the time that the company went bankrupt, to in a organization that was out here in California, finding that the person who had been the #1 salesperson in this vocational education organization for 3 years running had falsified signatures on the data of the students he signed up. That experience convinced me that there must be some better way to look systematically at how to lead and manage organizations. And at the same time, I ended up doing a fair amount of consulting with a wide variety of companies on issues having to do with quality, safety, et cetera. And the more I looked at those organizations, the more I realized something that those of you who are in engineering learn very early on, which is that there is a discipline called highly reliable organization theory that helps you think about these kinds of issues. And what really intrigues me, and the proposition that I'd like to advance today, is that the behaviors that highly reliable organization theory suggests make sense in the realms of safety and of quality, I think can apply just as well and in an overlapping way to ethical performance. So let me quickly look at the kind of 5 behaviors that constitute the core of highly reliable organization, or HRO theory. The first one is preoccupation with failure. Think what Marianne said about Paul ONeill. I happen to know, actually worked in Washington for a while before at OMB before he became the head of Alcoa. Think about him saying, look, don't give me all the statistics and the signatories of all the people who did the safety codes. I want to see the problems. I want them on my desk. I want to look at them. There's a guy who said, I don't care what the statistics say. I want to see the actual facts. As they say in the military, I want some ground truth. That's number one, preoccupation with failure. Always saying to oneself, what could go wrong? Andy Grove famously wrote, a book called Only the Paranoid Survive. And I think that's more true perhaps in ethics than anything else, that one always ought to believe that people will do the right thing, but verify that they are doing the right thing. Trust, but verify. The second behavior is a reluctance to simplify interpretations. Think about the incentive plan notion. You do, in fact, get what you incentivize. The problem is that there are always different ways that people are creative in terms of meeting those incentives. And if you don't think about all the different ways they can do it, you'll probably get what you don't want. You look at Wells Fargo that Dr. Jennings talked about in terms of the 3.2 million accounts. And the fact that Wells had, what did you say, 5 accounts, or 6 products per person compared to the industry average of 2.7. I mean, you look at that and say, something's wrong here. We can't just assume that, my God, we are incredibly better, as Dr. Jennings said, than anyone else. Third area, sensitivity to operations. The Bluebell example, actually, to go back to it. When you see things that are going wrong, you have to look at them. And in this age when information flows are accelerating and reputation can be destroyed in an instant, I think it's up to boards of directors. I think one of the very clear things that comes out from these conversations today and from what we see in the press, et cetera, is that boards of directors and organizations have got to get closer to the action. They're no longer can we have boards saying, we'll find the right CEO, we'll hand them the keys to the corporation or organization and let them go. Boards have got to be involved at every level, from strategy to processes to incentive systems, et cetera. And they have to be constantly obtaining ground truth. They have to be out there seeing what's going on. And that's sensitivity to operations. An aircraft carrier, and I've been on carriers looking at day and night flight operations because they're a great example of highly reliable organizations at work. No planes take off or land on a carrier unless the captain of the ship is in his chair, because the whole notion is something that can happen that in an instant needs a result. You can't run down and wake up the captain and say, listen, we've got 2 planes colliding on the deck, or there's an incoming missile because we're doing operations and it's a threat to some other country. He's always there. By analogy, I think boards of directors and CEOs need to demonstrate the quality of always being there. Fourth area, commitment to resilience, which I think is really interesting. The notion of saying something is likely to go wrong. Let's prepare for that possibility. Let's be able to handle more than one crisis at a time. Let's say to ourselves, if one thing is happening that's wrong here ethically, shouldn't we look for other possible things that might also be going wrong? In other words, don't assume that you do not have a systemic failure. Assume that you might have a systemic failure and consciously look out for it. And then the fifth characteristic is defer to expertise. The whole notion in the Bluebell business about the reports of the inspectors that there were these issues, the ground truth that you get from employees when they send in anonymous emails, but nobody in senior management listens to them. Those are the kinds of things that one has to change in terms of senior management and even, again, boards, I think, deferring to expertise, saying, who knows the most about these things, and what are they saying? Now, you probably also have to say, maybe they're wrong, but I'm going to find out. I'm going to verify. Now, let me add just one final thing, because I know we want to have some time for questions, and that is, one of the different perspectives on this is, how do you make these things happen? How do you imbue these characteristics in an organization? A lot of them are behaviors, but to make them work, I think you have to pull virtually every lever that you have as an organization. If you think about it, there's strategy, culture, leadership, business processes, incentives, information technology, and that's about it. Those are about the only levers that leaders have to make something happen. Now, how you make those work is what the science, if there is such a thing, of leadership is all about. But I would encourage you to think about the notion of taking these behaviors and these vectors of how highly reliable organizations work and apply them to your organization in terms of thinking about ethics, but use those 6 or 7 levers that you have as a manager and leader to make those things work for you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. You're all talking about structural and organizational and cultural aspects of ethics. Yet, whenever anything goes wrong in a major corporation, the first thing that the executives say is there's always a bad apple in the barrel. And of course, Phil Zimbardo's research led him to believe that the problem is not with the bad apples, but it's with the barrel makers, the people who create the system that provides the structure or the incentives for people, to go wrong. Yet, when I look at like what we're teaching here at USC, to our undergraduates in ethics, and they're all getting some ethics training. It's personal ethics. It doesn't touch any of these things that we're talking about. And when you read like the ethicists in the New York Times, it's all about personal ethics. We had this guy, Michael Josephson, here for years, and he was, everybody knew who he was. It was all personal ethics. He never dealt with the organization or with the structure of the things that cause people to go wrong. Have we been missing the boat on this? I just want your comments on that. I'd like to hear.
Well, you can have the code of ethics, you can have personal ethics in individuals, but if the culture is wrong, they'll go south on you, because individuals make decisions in companies that they would not otherwise make. A very simple example, a nurse who's working at an outpatient facility is told to do something by the doctor. And she doesn't think it's safe and thinks the patient should go to the hospital, but that costs them. And so she resists the doctor, and the doctor says, just do it. She would never make that decision on her own, but a person in authority told her the incentives, who gets rewarded, who gets promoted. So people interpret those signals, and you almost create a sandbox where these are the rules. If you want to play, you are rewarded. If you don't, you're the problem, not us. I want to share a simple example about this. It takes a really strong individual to do this. My oldest son went to ASU, and it was in his senior year, and he's been out about 5 years, so that ought to tell you how long ago it was. And he got a job at Wells Fargo, and he was so excited when he got it. He said, "Mom, I get $10 an hour, and I get a quarterly bonus check for all the new accounts and new account services." And I said, "Great." And when he was first working there, he would call me and say, "Mom, it's not even noon, and I already have 3 new customers and 6 new account services." And he said, "The quarterly check is looking great." And I said, "Well done." And then a few more months passed by, and he was working at a branch in Mesa, which is where we live, and it's a retirement area, and not a wealthy, a Social Security retirement area. And he said, "Mom, I need to talk to you. Can I come by the house?" And I said, "Sure." And he walked in and he said, "Mom, I'm starting to feel bad about something I'm doing at the bank." Honestly, I thought it was embezzlement, you know, because he's the 3rd child and your standard slip, you know, by the time Oxford Scholar on the 1st, just no felonies on the 3rd. And he explained to me that the people he'd done all these services and accounts for were coming back in, and they were really upset. And he said, "Mom, to tell you the truth, I don't think I knew all the costs." And he said, I just feel awful." And he said, "They're closing their accounts. They don't want to do it." And I'm looking at it as a business school professor and thinking, well, they can't believe this is organic growth. And so I coached him up a little bit and said, "Go talk to your supervisor." And he did. And she said, "Well, I don't know what to tell you, but this is how we measure you. And if you want a promotion, if you want to transfer, anything, if you want to continue with the bank, this is the way you're measured." And then she said, "And if you don't do it, I'll put you on the drive-through." Well, who gets new stuff at the drive-through? So that was a death knell to get rid of him. So he came by the house again and said, "Well, what do I do?" And I said, "Well, you have a tough decision to make." So it boiled down to, you know, my job or my ethics, and it was a decision he did not. And I said, "You know, you'll just have to make it." And in a proud parenting moment, he said, "I'm sorry, I can't do it." So he went in to give his 2 weeks notice, but he had a letter that explained to the supervisor exactly why he was quitting. And she read it and crumbled it up, laughed, threw it away. But he sent a copy of that up to Wells Fargo in San Francisco. Never heard back. And then when this story broke in 2016, it popped up on my computer, and I texted him. I said, "Sam, did you see Wells Fargo?" He said, "Oh, Mom, not only did I see it, I posted it on Facebook along with the copy of my letter that I sent." So I had a son who, thankfully, somewhere along the line got this sense of right and wrong. But he was put in a position, either you do this or you don't have a job, or you're not going to get promoted. And that's a cultural, and it was very clearly a cultural kind of thing. So personal ethics are important in the sense that they teach us right from wrong. So I don't want to eliminate that. I think it's important. But I also think that we have to understand that we put people in impossible situations, and it takes great strength for them to do it. And particularly, as we've learned today, nobody does anything anyway. Why bother? I don't have a choice here. So that the culture can trump whatever personal strength we have. So you have to work on the personal side that they have the gumption to see it, but you also have to work on the culture that gives them some out. And he just did not have any, and that's a tragedy.
Yeah, I think we've failed. I think our only model is exactly what you described. We want to infuse all of this ethics into our individual graduates, and then we send them out into the jungle and expect them to somehow be able to put those values to work. And that isn't a sufficient answer. And we send, and they encounter it at the lower levels. They encounter it as CEOs, and they have the same jungle, different jungle that they're facing, which is the quarterly earnings pressures and everything else, and we don't get the behavior that we've taught. I think there's no surprise. We haven't done a thing about the bad barrel. And so I think we haven't found the right model for how we incent ethical behavior in business at all.
Gary, you had a question that came to you. Did you?
So the question is, many Fortune 500 companies have their CEOs on their boards. So if it's the CEO who is unethical, how would you, unless they influence the board's decision, what are your views on having the CEO with the board? You know, we've talked a lot about artificial intelligence here and various other kinds of things. One of the things we haven't talked very much about at all is advances in neuroscience. And what advances in neuroscience are telling us is that there are a whole series of biases that we have unconsciously, typically, that speak actually to this very issue. One of those biases is in-group bias, the bias that boards of directors, for example, or other groups like that, to the extent that they are composed of relatively like-minded people, tend to conform to what the group thinks in general. That's one. The second is the captainitis bias. Okay, this guy is the CEO, he must know what he's talking about, we'll support him to the end. We can't do that anymore. I mean, I think what we're learning is, again, I think it's a trust but verify kind of environment that we live in. So on the one hand, I do think it's important that the CEO of an organization be on a board, because the more the board can understand that person on a personal level as well as a business level, the more I think they have an understanding of what makes her or him tick and where they're likely to get into trouble, where they're strong, where they can be relied on, et cetera. Having said that, I think it's really important that perhaps not just the audit committee, which always should have the ability to talk without having the CEO present, as well as having the CEO in a private conversation. But I think it's very, very important for the board to meet not just in a perfunctory way without the CEO, but in a substantive way, and have some deep conversation that may take an hour or so. Maybe they have a board dinner during a board meeting at least once every 6 months, where they talk extensively about the business without the CEO present. I think it's a great question and one that needs to be wrestled with.
The question was around really influencing middle management to make and follow ethical decisions, and the other one was about, since we can't really stop all the ethical violations, how can we limit the impact? And the way I'll try to answer this question is, number one, when violations occur, and violations will always continue to occur, what the workforce and really what the world is watching is, are you taking action, and if so, how? So I would say activate your executive team, develop your board. I think my colleagues mentioned the board needs to be closer to the everyday processes of the organization, so taking action, taking personal accountability. Secondly, there's a lot of mention around culture, and I mentioned today about the role of middle management, and I think Dr. Jennings, your example, and others' examples around, like in the case of Wells Fargo, it was totally line management supervisors. What are we doing in organizations to develop and coach middle management around learning how to listen, listening up, taking the time to have a dialogue in your organization around reporting misconduct, understanding how to take action? Because what I have seen in my 2 decades is there's this paralysis analysis. People freeze. Or in the case that you shared, Marianne, with your son, a supervisor doesn't even want it to probably reflect badly on him or her. Or this is how they're motivated in terms of there's motivated blindness. So it's profits without morals, essentially. It's at any cost. So if systematically the culture has allowed unethical behavior to be a means to gain profit and gain the bottom line, and they are only rewarded and recognized in that one way, and furthermore, middle management is not developed or encouraged or incentivized to promote speaking out, then you essentially have that conflict. So organizations today are trying to develop and shift this Titanic of behavior and change those normalized patterns.
Would anyone like to have the last word on this panel?
You would, probably.
No? Yes, go right ahead.
No. Well, I want to say something. And that is, we came in on time. And after lunch,
do we get our bonus?
We stayed awake, and we tried our best to keep you awake.
Where's
so
our
thank
check?
you very much.
Where's our check?
Yeah.